Dr. Johan Rockström, PhD, leads an international staff of over 400 scientists and researchers, including the team of scientists that present the Planetary Boundaries framework. He is a globally recognized expert in sustainability and natural resource management. As a professor and co-developer of the Planetary Boundaries framework, his work focuses on sustainable development, water resources, and influencing policy. Today, we'll explore his insights on addressing global sustainability challenges and the role of investors in transformative change in time to keep our planet livable. So in your work on planetary boundaries, you've highlighted the 9 critical Earth system thresholds that we must stay within to maintain the planet's capacity to support life. Where are we on these boundaries today, and what critical tipping points in the Earth system most concern the scientific community?
Mm. Yes, let me start, just by reinforcing the fact that this is now very mature science. We have 2 decades of advancements and have been able to, provide ample scientific confidence that these are the 9 Earth system processes that regulates the stability, the life support, and the resilience of the Earth system. So if we can stay within the safe operating space of these 9 planetary boundaries, then we have a good chance of ensuring not only life support and resilience, but also the stability of the planet's ability to support humanity for current and future generations. We've quantified the safe boundaries for all the 9 planetary boundary systems. They include not only climate system, but it's also the living, what we call the biosphere boundaries of biodiversity, the bloodstream of the whole planet, the hydrological cycle, the cycles of nutrients, like nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus, the configuration of biomes, what we call land system change. These are the nature boundaries, but we also have boundaries on the stratospheric ozone layer, a stable ocean system, air pollutants, and how much chemical overloading does the planet tolerate before we risk irreversible changes in the environments that can support species, including humans, on planet Earth. So you have 9 large systems, and just as you flagged, the latest scientific assessment shows that 6 of these 9 are outside of the safe boundaries, which means that we're putting at risk the life support for humanity, for all our societies and economies in the world. And which are these 9? Well, it's of course the climate system, where we are deep into a human-caused crisis, but it's also loss of biodiversity, undermining the stability of ecosystems, that we're degrading land systems, threatening the stability of the Amazon rainforest, for example, overconsumption of fresh water, both green water, the soil moisture that drives the photosynthesis, and blue water, the water that flows in rivers, lakes, and feeds our groundwater levels and is fundamental for irrigation, for example, that we are overloading with chemicals across the world, that we are in a very dramatic way, actually, transgressing or breaching the boundaries of overloading of reactive nitrogen and phosphorus, which leads to eutrophication, dead zone in coastal areas, but also feeds back and reinforce global warming. And then we have overall, those are the 6. So just to repeat them again, so climate, biodiversity loss, land system change, overuse of fresh water, overloading of nutrients, and overloading of human-generated chemicals. And this puts us at risk of a very fundamental existential risks, because what it means, apart from the immediate impacts on humans and economies in terms of food insecurity, in terms of water scarcity, in terms of air pollutants, which causes premature death of 8 to 9 million people per year already today. All the extreme events of climate change we're seeing already today at 1.2 degrees Celsius of global mean surface temperature rise, causing increased frequency of droughts, floods, fires, heat waves. Apart from all these consequences, which are really invoices being sent to the economies and to human well-being across the world today, What worries us even more scientifically today is that this is also the first signs of a planet which is losing its health, which is losing its fundamental ability to buffer and dampen the stress caused by our unsustainable overexploitation of resources by transgressing these boundaries. And so we're seeing a weakening of the planet, and at the same time, a planet that is pushing back very hard on extreme events. And that's a bad combination, not least when we are so deep into a climate crisis where our only chance to solve the climate crisis, our only chance to hold ourselves under the boundary, the limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which all countries in the world have agreed upon in the legally binding Paris Agreement, is to both phase out fossil fuels in an accelerated pace for a landing zone at a net zero world economy by 2050, which all countries have agreed upon. But that won't be enough. We also need to come back into the safe operating space of the biosphere boundaries. We need to come back into the safe space on biodiversity, on fresh water, on land, on nitrogen, phosphorus, on air pollutants. Why? Well, it's because we know today scientifically that those boundaries are the ones that determine whether the ocean can continue to buffer carbon dioxide and buffer heat, that intact nature on land can continue to buffer carbon dioxide and dampen impacts of, for example, self amplified warming due to collapse of ecosystems, which leads to changes in fire patterns. So we have a situation where the planetary boundaries determine, in a way, or provides us with an accounting system to be able to navigate ourselves towards a safe landing within a safe space, even if we focus only on climate.
One of the things you've spoken about is the human and social costs of carbon. And we see in our network increasing recognition of this interdependence between people and the planet. Can you also address the scientific projections on the economic costs of the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, so climate change has, both fast and slow impacts on people and our economies. So the fast variables are droughts, floods, heat waves, impacting on labor productivity, impacting on people's health, impacting on food security. And then you have the slow variables, which is the risk of crossing tipping points, changing the rate of sea level rise, changing the rate of precipitation patterns, causing unreliability on particularly food systems across the world. So far, the economic costs of climate change can only quantify the dollar value of the cost of inaction on the fast variables. The latest assessments here, you know, published just in April this year in a big study in one of our most prestigious scientific journals in Nature, led by a scientist called Maximilian Kotz and colleagues from my own institute, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, shows that even with a conservative assessment, including impacts on the economy of heat waves and precipitation rainfall extremes, leads to the conclusion that we are already today committed, already with the global warming that we've caused today, committed to a 19% decline in income levels by 2050 compared to a business as usual economic growth. So a drawdown of massive loss of economic value. It amounts to an estimated decline of 38 trillion US dollars per year of decline because of climate impacts. So that is the latest assessment, and those 19% is showing how deep into the climate crisis we are in terms of economic cost. Just compare that with, for example, the Stern review in 2006, 2007, that already then showed that the cost of inaction, way exceeded the cost of action. The cost of action to solve the climate crisis being in the order of 1 to 2% of global GDP, and the cost of inaction then estimated to 5 to 10% of global GDP. now that we are continuing to move in a very dangerous direction of continued increase in global emissions and continued rising of temperatures and continued impacts on the economies, that we're now that we are in double-digit impacts on the global economy. So that's one estimate. But the other estimate, which is well grounded today in science, and you see it picked up even in the US Environment Protection Agency, is the social cost of carbon. So the dominant greenhouse gas, as we all know, is carbon dioxide emitted from fossil fuel burning. 70% roughly of the global warming is caused by this dominant greenhouse gas. This is why economics have tried to put an assessment of what is the cost of every additional ton of carbon dioxide on people. How does it impact people's labor productivity, people's health, and so on? And the latest assessment there is that we're up today, already today, at social costs of carbon, the impacts of carbon on people, of in the order of 200 to 500 US dollars per ton of carbon dioxide. And the Environment Protection Agency in the US lands on an average level today already at 230 US dollars per ton of carbon dioxide. And compare that with the highest carbon price, the highest attempt policy-wise to correct the market failure that it means to allow the economy to emit carbon dioxide without pricing that externality. The highest price on the market is the European Union's emission trading scheme, which at its highest level has reached 100 US dollars per ton of carbon dioxide, and tends to be much lower. And most of the other 40 countries in the world that have a price on carbon have levels of 50 US dollars or lower. So, we are today having so much evidence that the damage caused by emitting carbon dioxide from oil, coal, and gas way exceeds the price we have in the economy, which tends to be zero for most sectors, and at best has been, approaching 100 euros, 100 US dollars per ton of carbon dioxide in particularly industry. But for example, for transport, air transport or land-based transport or shipping, we have, for most of the global economy, zero cost. This is a massive global market failure, which needs to be corrected, very rapidly to provide the right incentives for innovation, technology, and for companies and finance to invest in the green transition.
Well, Johan, you've talked about how we're in a massive accelerating transformation stage. And looking ahead, what are our prospects? How much time do we have? Are there solutions that you have your eye on?
Well, time is running out. I mean, this is, to be honest, a scientific debate today. There are many of my colleagues that conclude that the 1.5 degrees Celsius climate boundary is already lost. My conclusion is that it's not lost, that the window is still open but rapidly closing, even though we will not be able to hold the 1.5 degrees Celsius boundary without a period of overshoot. It will get worse before it potentially gets better, but it requires that we accelerate the phase out, the energy transition, and that we accelerate the transition towards a sustainable global economy, bringing us back within all the safe planetary boundaries. What does this mean in terms of the pace? Well, for global emission of greenhouse gases, we know the pace. We need to cut global emissions of greenhouse gases by 50%, by half, in the next 5 years, up until 2030, and then continue to cut emissions by half to reach a net zero world economy by 2050. This is well established in the science. It's in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It gives us only a 50% chance of holding ourselves within the climate planetary boundary, meaning delivering on the legally binding Paris Agreement. Remember that when the world gathered in Dubai at COP28, the statement there signed by all countries says that the world has now agreed that we're phasing away from fossil fuels, we're accelerating the reduction of emissions this decade in line with science. Now, what that means is a 7% decline of global emissions per year to have any chance of following the scientifically defined path. And we are today increasing emissions by in the order of 1% per year. So we're talking of a major, major turnaround. And then your question that is this possible to follow? Well, the answer is yes, it is possible. The solutions are there. We know how to do this. We know how to transition away from particularly fossil fuel-based electricity production. We're moving towards an electricity-driven global economy across all sectors. We have scalable solutions for renewable energy systems. And not only that, we have more and more evidence that particularly solar and wind uh, can outcompete fossil fuel-based equivalents across all markets in the world, even without subsidies. So we know how to move ourselves towards, not only the early phases of exponential curves, but actually to double-digit S-curve developments on innovation space. Really the rapid upscaling part of innovation pathways. What we see today, though, is a tendency of policy pushbacks. We see a tendency of a slowdown. And the reason for this is largely because of, the spillover from the slowdown in the global economy, rising inflation, rising cost to consumers, and blended with the populism, misinformation, tendencies of more short-sighted politics in many particularly advanced economies in the world. So we are at a very delicate phase right now where many of the financial institutions, or most, I would even argue, most of the big multinational companies in all sectors have turned a corner and stepped on board the transition towards decarbonized business models, but policy is lagging behind and not following through with the shifts in economic policies that can set the playing field straight and provide the right incentives for finance and for the economy to move faster in this necessary transition.
Really grateful that we can present your perspective to this global community of impact investors. How do you see impact investors playing a more proactive role in accelerating the speed and scale of solutions? And how would you like investors to collaborate with the scientific community?
To begin with, we know that the financial sector is fundamental to have any chance of holding the speed and going to scale, which is the only thing that counts today. We are well beyond the piloting phase. We're well beyond the incremental testing of ideas phase. Now the only thing that counts is system transitions at speed and at scale. And for that, we need the big finance, the big capital flows to go from, the 5+ trillion US dollars per year in subsidies to the old economy, the fossil fuel driven systems, towards supporting the transition towards the green technologies. And impact investing can play, and I would even argue must play a fundamental role in being the pivotal funding that can make positive tipping points occur in the global economy, because fundamentally it boils down to confidence. Are we confident of the direction of travel? And I can see that we have turned a corner. We are in the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel driven global economy, but we are in this very turbulent transition phase. We're going backwards and forwards. It's up and down. We have winners and losers. We are not yet fully on a let's say really clear pace towards decarbonization, even though we are definitely in many sectors way beyond a turning point. And that I think is the moment where impact investment can play the most decisive role in helping sectors across all facets of our economy to really go to scale.
And can you share an example of an initiative where investors in the financial sector have successfully contributed to addressing the degradation of a planetary boundary?
We see more and more efforts combining, particularly industries in the transport sector, both the private car, I mean land-based transport, but also heavy truck industry, um, linking up with innovations in renewable energy production and technology development in battery development. So basically connecting the big car industry with innovations on battery technology, with provision of green electricity, and that value chain is increasingly working together uh, to to accelerate, but also scale electric mobility, which has only been possible thanks to impact investment and risk, capital coming in, investing with blended finance from both public sector and private sector. So that is one very good example. The other one, increasingly, I think we are seeing a rising recognition that the energy transition is not the only transition we need to see, but we also need to see the transformation of the global food
Mhm.
system. And the global food system is a tremendously complex, broad value chain from including how we manage forests, ecosystems, agricultural areas, all the way to how processed food and the offers to consumers in the big globalized food industry. And here as well, companies that try to innovate towards more plant-based diets and shifting towards more regenerative agricultural practices, doing that in ways that also connect with insurance companies, but also with impact investments. So I think we are seeing both in the built environment, in the food system transition, and in the energy transition, efforts of trying to combine finance, innovation, and scaling in the business sectors. But again, we are in unfortunately still across all these moving too slowly and need to incentivize private investment to come forward even more prominently, particularly in the emerging economies in the global south.
In looking ahead, what are some promising innovations, whether technological, financial, or policy driven, like incentives that you're just speaking about, that you believe could help align global financial systems with the urgent need to protect our planetary systems in the limited amount of time we have left?
Limited time is the key issue here. I think in for the next 5 years, the next 5 to 10 years, I think we have to act on multiple fronts simultaneously. And one, of course, being scaling what we have and stop doing wrong, so to say, to really be able to shift the dial over the next 5 years. And that, in my mind, in terms of innovations, has predominantly to do with policy, setting a price on carbon, helping financial institutions to feel confidence of the direction that the global economy is taking, to really make stakeholders across the entire global economy reassured of the direction of travel. So that I think is the most important innovation. But on the longer term, I think we still need much more research and development, not only on technologies across all sectors, and we are just at the beginning, for example, on new foods and how to build more resilient, scalable, and healthy plant-based protein sources for our future more healthy and sustainable diets. But also in terms of governance systems, I see a direction here where we're putting so much pressure on the entire planet that we see that we are so interconnected that the to put it simple, the nation state is no longer an adequate unit of governance to manage the stability of the global economy, even in terms of sustainability. And then we need to strengthen global governance based on democratic principles. And how do we do that? Well, one first step is to monitor and really quantify and measure the entire planet. And thanks to supercomputing, satellite-based Earth observations, our Earth system modeling capacities, and then all the science we have on the functioning of the Earth system, we can actually do this. And we need, to put it simple, a mission control room to be able to be accountable at the global level. And this is still missing, but it's one of those pieces that I hope can connect also with impact investment and provide ourselves with, the golden rule being we only manage what we measure, and now we have to measure at the planetary scale. And this is something that I think is also important as an upstream incentivizer for the innovation space across the value chains.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. At the GIN, we think a lot about how investors should be connecting their work to these global systems, and how we can connect the individual transactions and portfolios that investors are building to how they're actually moving the needle on these big systemic issues that you've spoken so eloquently about. I think some of the themes that are really resonating with me is this theme of interconnectedness and appreciation for point solutions. Need to understand how they relate to everything else happening in the world and the social dimensions, the impact on nature and on climate, as well as this need for better collaboration and a global perspective on how we're understanding our progress and how we're accelerating the pace of change in the right direction. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Amit.